Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something different today.
Always up for a good deep dive. What are we exploring this time?
It's George Orwell, but not the usual 1984 stuff. This is like behind the scenes Orwell.
Oh, intriguing. You going full on biography then?
Kinda. We're digging into his time in Burma using this book, Finding George Orwell in Burma. It's by Emma Larkin.
Okay, I know Larkin. Her stuff is fascinating. Part travelogue, part like literary investigation, right?
Exactly. And that's what makes this so cool. She's trying to figure out what it was about Burma that got to Orwell. Like what did he experience there that stuck with him, that we see echoed in his books years later?
Ah, so it's like she's following his footsteps, but in a literary sense,
Yeah.
trying to uncover the hidden influences on his writing.
Yeah. And keep in mind, Larkin's traveling through Burma under a dictatorship. So she's having to be super careful, changing names, protecting identities, the whole bit.
Wow, so she's dealing with some of those Orwellian themes firsthand. Surveillance, censorship.
Right. And you can feel that tension in the book. It's like she's almost stepping into one of his novels herself.
That's a great way to put it. This sense of hidden truths, the weight of unspoken things, it really sets the stage for understanding Orwell on a deeper level, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's jump into it. Larkin starts in Mandalay, which, if you think about it, already has this kind of exotic, almost romanticized air, thanks to Kipling and others.
Right, like East is East and West is West and never the twain shall meet. Very romanticized view of the East.
Exactly. But Larkin digs deeper, peels back those layers, and what she finds is a place where, yeah, there's beauty, but there's also hardship, political oppression, a very real struggle for freedom.
Which is so much closer to the world Orwell was writing about, right? It wasn't all sunshine and roses, that's for sure.
No, not at all. And here's where it gets really interesting and kind of creepy. One of the things Larkin discovers is this thing the regime does. They rename places. And not just like old British colonial names, they rename Burmese places too.
Whoa, seriously, that's wild. Like, what's the purpose of that? Control. Trying to erase history.
I think it's a bit of both. It's like they're trying to control the narrative, right? If you control the language, you control how people think about their own past, their own identity.
Gives me serious 1984 vibes, the whole Ministry of Truth constantly rewriting history.
Exactly. And it makes you think, what happens to a society when its history is erased? How do you even begin to question the present if you don't have a past to compare it to?
It's a recipe for disaster, I'd say. Loss of identity, loss of perspective, loss of the ability to even recognize when you're being manipulated.
And that search for traces of the past, for those lost stories,
Yeah.
that's a big part of what drives Larkin's journey. It's like she's trying to piece together a puzzle that's constantly being disrupted, hidden.
And that's where things get really interesting because she stumbles upon this guy, I mind right. This guy is like a character straight out of an Orwell novel himself.
Totally. He's this reclusive bookworm who's managed to collect all these amazing banned books, risking his neck to do it.
Yeah.
Larkin stumbles upon his secret library, and it's like stepping into another world.
It's like that scene in Fahrenheit 451, with the book people, each one memorizing a different book to keep the knowledge alive.
Yes, exactly. And what's so powerful about that image, both in Fahrenheit and in Larkin's book, is that it shows how, even in the most oppressive circumstances, people find ways to resist, to keep those dangerous ideas alive.
Absolutely. It's like this inherent human need to seek out knowledge, to question, to connect with something beyond the official narrative.
And that's exactly what I mean it represents, right? He's this symbol of intellectual resistance, quietly guarding these forbidden texts. And get this, when Larkin's there, he pulls out a battered copy of Animal Farm. And with this twinkle in his eye, he says, this is a very Burmese book.
Oh, I love that. Okay, I gotta know. What does he mean by that? Animal Farm is about, well, animals.
Right. Larkin's confused too. So she asks him to explain. And he says, because it's about pigs and dogs ruling the country.
Whoa. Talk about hitting the nail on the head. He's making a direct connection between Orwell's fable and the situation in Burma under New Wynn's regime.
Exactly. Just goes to show how timeless Orwell's themes are, right?
Yeah.
Even though Animal Farm is set on this farm, it speaks to the experience of living under any kind of oppressive regime anywhere in the world. And I meant, he even uses this incredibly evocative phrase to describe life under No Win. He calls it the time of the green spectacles.
The time of the green spectacles.
Yeah.
Okay, that is both beautiful and chilling. I'm getting this sense of forced optimism, like you have to pretend everything's fine even when it's not.
Yeah, like you're constantly being watched, judged, expected to conform to this facade. And that ties directly into this theme of surveillance and control that runs throughout Larkin's book.
Yeah.
Like, there's this one point where she's attending a football match, and it's being filmed for propaganda purposes.
Okay, I can already imagine how this is going to go. Stage smiles, everything sunshine and rainbows, while in reality.
Well, you're not wrong. So the
Oh.
cameras are rolling, and Larkin notices how they keep focusing on this empty goal.
It's weird, right? Like, why not show the game?
Yeah, what's up with that? Seems like a strange directorial choice.
Right. Well, later on, she finds out the real reason. There were riots breaking out in the stands, police brutality, the whole thing, but none of that was shown on camera. Wow, talk about controlling the narrative. It's straight out of Orwell's playbook. It reminds me of doublethink, that whole idea of holding two contradictory beliefs in your mind at the same time.
It's like they're erasing reality as it's happening and replacing it with this fabricated version of events. It's not just the football match. Larkin talks about how this control over information seeps into every aspect of life. Even the tour guides. They're terrified to deviate from the official script.
Oh, wow, that's wild. So even the people who are supposed to be showing off the country, they're caught up in this web of fear and censorship.
Absolutely. They're forced to present this golden land facade to tourists, while the reality on the ground is much different.
Which creates this atmosphere of self-censorship, doesn't it? Like when you know you can't trust the official narrative, you start to second-guess everything. You start to censor your own thoughts, your own words, because you never know who might be listening.
It's like this invisible weight pressing down on everyone, making them question every interaction, every conversation. And it can have a heartbreaking impact on personal connections.
Ah.
Larkin tells this story about a woman who cleans toilets at a guest house. It's obvious she's struggling, overworked, mistreated.
Oh, it's just awful to feel so trapped, so powerless.
Right. And so Larkin, being a decent human, tries to offer her some help. But the woman is terrified to accept.
Wow, she's that afraid of what? Getting in trouble for accepting help.
It's the fear of repercussions, of being seen as stepping out of line, even for something as simple as accepting a kind gesture. That fear is so ingrained, so pervasive, that it prevents her from getting the help she desperately needs.
That is just heartbreaking. It shows how this kind of regime, this atmosphere of fear, it seeps into the very fabric of society, erodes those basic human connections.
It's like everyone is walking on eggshells all the time, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. And then on top of that, there's the constant presence of the military intelligence, the MI.
Right, like the ever-present eyes and ears of the regime, always watching, always listening.
Exactly. Larkin describes this vast network of informers, people who report on their neighbors, their colleagues, even their own families. And they have this chilling term for these informers. They call them kasenyo, which translates to the handle of the axe.
The handle of the axe. Just the name itself sends shivers down my spine. It creates this sense of paranoia, of not knowing who to trust, who might be listening in and twisting your words against you.
Exactly. It's like this constant fear gnawing at you, this feeling of being surrounded by potential enemies.
Yeah.
And Larkin, she experiences this firsthand when she meets this retired engineer named Mayo Key. He warns her about how insidious this MI system is, how you don't even have to be doing anything wrong to be caught up in it.
So it's not even about what you do, it's about what you might do, what you might think. They control you through fear of what they might do.
Exactly. And he says this thing that really struck with me. He says, the MI doesn't even have to be watching you all the time. They just have to make you believe they are.
It's like the panopticon effect, right? That feeling of being constantly observed, even if you're not. It creates this powerful form of self-censorship because you internalize that surveillance. You start policing your own thoughts and actions out of fear.
And that fear, that sense of being constantly watched, it has a chilling effect on education. Larkin talks about visiting schools where teachers are afraid to speak freely, where students are taught a sanitized version of history, stripped of any critical thinking or dissent.
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Except in this case, it's more like those who are not allowed to remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
It's like they're trying to mold young minds, to create a generation that doesn't even know how to question, how to think critically.
Exactly. It's about control, plain and simple. And what better way to control a population than to control what they learn, what they believe?
Larkin has this really telling anecdote about meeting a headmaster at one of these schools.
Hmm?
And you could just feel the tension, the fear radiating off of him.
I can only imagine being in that position, responsible for these young minds, but knowing that one wrong word could have dire consequences.
It's a heavy burden to carry. And he's obligated to get her information just in case. He's clearly uncomfortable, but he's also terrified of not complying.
It just shows how deeply ingrained that fear is, how it permeates every level of society.
And this control over education, it isn't limited to what's taught in schools either. Larkin talks about universities being shut down, courses being shortened, students graduating without even basic knowledge. There's even this dark joke that goes around, so you've finished your education then, when someone mentions finishing the 10th standard.
It's like they're deliberately holding people back, preventing them from reaching their full potential.
It's like they're afraid of their own people, of what might happen if they actually allowed them to become educated, informed citizens. And this theme of erasing the past, of controlling the narrative, it goes beyond education too. Larkin visits this town, Maine, and she comes across this cemetery. But it's been completely demolished.
Demolished? Like, what happened?
They ripped up the headstones, desecrated the graves, the whole thing. And get this, they built a police station on top of it.
Oh, wow. Talk about a symbol. It's like they're literally trying to bury the past, to erase any trace of what came before.
It's brutal. And what's even more heartbreaking is that Larkin meets the caretaker of the cemetery, and he's desperately trying to salvage what he can. He's collecting fragments of headstones, scooping up handfuls of dirt from the grave.
Oh, it's like he's trying to hold on to something precious that's slipping away, trying to preserve those memories.
He's like a guardian of memory, trying to defy this wave of forgetting that's sweeping over everything. And, when you think about it, this act of erasing history, it's not just about destroying physical objects. It's about destroying the stories those objects represent, the memories they hold, the connections they forge between the past and the present.
Absolutely. It's about cutting people off from their own history, their own identity. And if you can do that, then you can control them in the present.
And this is where things get really interesting, because Larkin meets this woman, Tin Lay, who has this really provocative take on all of this. She argues that, in a way, the Burmese people have become complicit in their own oppression.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a bold statement. How does she justify that?
Well, she argues that centuries of monarchy conditioned them to authoritarian rule,
Yeah.
that they've internalized this sense of powerlessness, this acceptance of the status quo. It's a controversial viewpoint for sure, but it raises some important questions about the nature of power, of responsibility, of how we become complicit in the systems that oppress us.
It's easy to point fingers at the oppressors, but what about the role we play in perpetuating those systems? It's a tough question to grapple with, but an important one nonetheless.
Definitely. And, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the darkness, by the sense of hopelessness that seems to permeate Larkin's journey. But amidst the darkness, there were these glimmers of hope, these acts of resistance, however small or fleeting.
Like that caretaker trying to salvage pieces of the cemetery. Or I might, risking everything to protect those books.
Exactly. Those acts of defiance, preserving memory, of clinging to hope, they matter. And one of the most powerful examples of this is the story of Aung San Suu Kyi.
Right, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate who spent years under house arrest for her pro-democracy activism.
Exactly. Larkin talks about how even though her image was banned, you'd still find portraits of her being sold secretly in markets. Right. People would risk their lives just to own a picture of her, a symbol of hope, of resistance.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure. That the desire for freedom, for justice, for a better world, it can't be extinguished.
And it makes you think about our own world today, right? About the information we consume, the stories we tell ourselves, and who benefits from those narratives. Are we paying attention to the subtle ways in which power operates, the ways in which we might be complicit in perpetuating systems of oppression?
It's a call to awareness, isn't it? To look beyond the surface, to question the narratives we're being sold, and to find those glimmers of hope, those acts of resistance, in our own lives and in the world around us.
And if this deep dive has piqued your interest in Orwell, in Burma, or in the power of one person to make a difference, I highly recommend checking out Emma Larkin's Finding George Orwell in Burma. It's a journey worth taking. And that's a wrap on this deep dive, folks. Keep those minds curious, and we'll catch you next time for another deep dive into a new and fascinating topic.